So thank you very much for the opportunity to come here and talk about the Northern Ireland Sheep Scab programme as part of this overall programme, looking at planning for performance in the beef and sheep sector. So I'm just going to cover the background of where this current programme came from. So we'll talk a little bit about what Sheep Scab is, the Sheep Scab Control Group, and what's happened in the past, and then what we're doing now through the funding that we've received from BBSRC this summer. So sheep scab is a highly infectious disease of sheep, and the picture we have here is of a sheep scab mite, and this is a real Northern Irish sheep scab mite found on a sheep in South Armagh last spring. And it's a very debilitating disease. Anyone who's had it in their flock or seen sheep that have been affected can appreciate how debilitating it is. The sheep get very itchy, and it gets to the point that they just spend all their time rubbing on fences or hedges, gates, troughs, feeders, to the point that they actually stop eating. They don't take enough food in, they lose body condition. And that's a real problem in the autumn and winter, particularly in store lambs. If you get sheep scab and store lambs, it can really knock the condition off them very quickly and put you a long way back in your planned date for getting them finished. If it gets into ewes, they lose body condition, and if they're already in lamb, the lamb growth is going to suffer. There's not going to be enough colostrum when the lambs are born, so you're going to have weak lambs born. You're going to have not enough colostrum, so you're going to be running the risk of watery mouth, joint ill, and all sorts of problems then in your lambs. Sheep, if they're left untreated for long enough, can die either of exposure because their fleece falls off and they just get cold and wet in the Northern Ireland winter, or secondary infections can come in and affect the skin and affect the sheep and cause them to die that way. There's no spontaneous recovery. Some sheep will improve if they survive the winter and the days start to warm up, particularly if any remaining fleece is clipped off. Some sheep will survive, they will improve, but they won't have got rid of the sheep scab mites. There'll still be some of them on their head, and around their ears, and around their eyes, and under their tail, and between their legs. And in time, once the fleece grows back out, the sheep scab mites that are on the sheep will come back out of hiding and will start to move around the sheep again and start up another round of infection. So there's no spontaneous recovery, though some sheep will show signs getting better, but you can't consider them to be cured unless you intervene and actually treat them. Those sheep that look as if they're getting better, they're a very high risk for transmitting of sheep scab from one flock to the next. People think they've got better, or maybe haven't even realized they had sheep scab. They knew something was going on. They didn't look great, but the wool started growing back, and particularly, as I say, in the springtime or after clipping, they look a lot better. They're not particularly itchy again, and those are high-risk sheep for transmitting scab from one flock to the next. And it's a real problem, these sheep that don't show the classic signs of sheep scab, and that's something we've found through the literature and also talking to farmers. Some sheep that do survive without having treatment to kill off all the mites, the second time and the third time that they get sheep scab, they're not as itchy. The wool doesn't all fall out. They look vaguely normal. So people can have had a problem and maybe treated it, but not quite right, or not treated it at all. Sheep recover to a degree, but are still covered in sheep scab mites, but aren't as itchy. They're not losing their wool, and people don't realize there's a problem. So there are farmers out there who genuinely don't realize that their flock has sheep scab in it, and they're a high risk as well for passing the disease on to neighbours. Because the neighbours aren't aware it's there, they can't see the signs that they're looking for. They have that picture in their mind of the scabby sheep is not what they see in front of them. And the farmers as well don't realise that they've got sheep scab. So they take them to the market in good conscience, believing they're selling clean sheep. But there are a few mites on them, and in time those mite numbers increase. So it's debilitating. There's no spontaneous recovery, but there are some sheep that don't show very many signs, and they're a big risk, and we have to remember them. So we can't just rely on looking at sheep to say whether there's scab or not in those sheep. There's a significant economic cost. There's an economic cost through treatment. You're probably looking at over £1 a head to get them dipped, and more, similar or more for the injectable treatments. And as well, you've got your production losses. those sheep are going to be losing condition, so you're going to have to feed them up to get them back to where they were, particularly if you're dealing with store lambs. The margins in store lambs, as we've heard tonight, are very, very tight. And if your sheep are set back a couple of weeks in growth, and you've then faced with 60+ days of withdrawal period on whatever treatment that you've used, or 50+ days of withdrawal on the treatment, that's an awful lot of extra winter feeding, potentially for no economic return. So there's a significant economic cost. And sheep scab is notifiable in Northern Ireland. We should be telling the department if we think that there is sheep scab in our flock, or if our vet diagnoses sheep scab in the flock. And that's important because if nobody tells the department that there's sheep scab circulating, then the department can genuinely think that there is no sheep scab circulating and they can not do anything about it. But if we, who know that there's a lot of sheep scab out there, if we start telling the department every time we find it, it makes them sit up, it makes them realize that there is a significant problem out there and that time, money, and expertise is going to need to be invested in dealing with the sheep scab that's out there. And that's partly where the sheep scab group arose from. In 2017, 2018, there was an awful lot of sheep scab about in my part of the country and other bits of Northern Ireland. I had only seen sheep scab once in the first 40 odd years of my life. But by 2017, 2018, I was seeing it every week when I was out around the countryside. I was seeing sheep with scab down around in the lowlands, not just up on the traditional stereotypical hill farms or extensive grazing areas. But I was seeing it down in the lowlands, both in store lambs that have been bought in and in the sort of native flocks that live in the lowland all year round. And I was going to various different meetings. Sheep scab was never on the agenda, but there was farmers there and there were vets there. And we all knew each other. We all knew who had interest in sheep, and we would talk about sheepy things. And sheep scab just kept getting mentioned time and time again. Are you seeing more? Are you seeing more? What's it like in your part of the country? So in 2019, we had a meeting at Greenmount. We just said, anyone who's interested, come along and let's see what the situation is. We had nearly 100 people at that meeting. And there was industry-wide support for that at that meeting, and for the concept at the end of the meeting of going forward and doing something about it. We had farmers there, we had vets there, with the union there, we had the Sheep Association there, we had CAFRE and DAERA, we had representatives from a number of the pharmaceutical companies, we had representatives from farm merchants. So everyone across the industry that had any interest in sheep was there, and were acknowledging there was a problem that we needed some support in dealing with. So the scab control group was volunteers from all those sectors, from the sheep farmers, from the union, Sheep Association, vets, etc. They considered what the problem was in Northern Ireland. We looked at the barriers to getting better control. We looked at what was happening elsewhere, and we quite quickly realised that England, Scotland, and Wales, at various different levels and through various different initiatives, were ahead of Northern Ireland on developing plans to control sheep scab. For example, Scotland had free testing. England were developing various pilots, and they'd done a number of surveys. Wales were even further down the line. They'd done the surveys, they'd done some pilot work, and they were approaching their government £4 or £5 million to do a national control programme. So we realised that here in Northern Ireland, we were a long way behind. We asked DAERA what the situation was in Northern Ireland, and they told us that sheep scab was present in Northern Ireland and that there was 1 or 2 cases per year that they were aware of. And that just didn't fit with the experience and the expectations of the farmers, particularly in the sheep scab group, who believed that this was a serious underestimation of the problem. It ties in a little bit with this whole thing of the disease being notifiable and people being scared of the department, not wanting to talk to the department, not wanting to involve the department. So farmers weren't telling the department. So the department were saying, well, we've only seen 1 or 2 cases a year, whereas as individual farmers, most of us could have pointed to 3 or 4 cases in our neighbourhood in the past year, never mind 1 or 2 cases across Northern Ireland over the whole year. So it was a little bit hard to convince some of the people that we encountered through DAERA that there was a genuine problem out around the country, and that something needed to be done about it. In 2021, there was a survey carried out here in Northern Ireland, And we had 122 people responded to the survey, and 44 of those farmers described the experience of sheep scab in their flock over the previous 5 years. So 44 flocks had sheep scab. Some of them had it several times in that 5-year window that we looked at. So those figures were a starting point to suggest that there was more sheep scab out there than the official DERA figures of 1 or 2 cases a year were telling us. The survey also highlighted that farmers were seeing scabby sheep in the markets and in the abattoirs. And those are places where there are DERA officials and inspectors. Again, this was something that really grated with the farmers, that they could see sheep scab, but some of the officials couldn't see sheep scab. So it was, that wasn't helping build the relationship that was necessary to get some progress. So the sheep scab group took that information from that survey. We partnered with the Morden Research Institute, AFBI, and Animal Health and Welfare Northern Ireland. And together we were awarded £220,000 for a project to investigate sheep scab in Northern Ireland, to do some knowledge exchange. So go out and tell vets and prescribers and farmers about sheep scab, but also to listen to vets, prescribers, and farmers about their experiences of sheep scab, listen to them to hear what the problems they were encountering, to hear what the barriers that they had to getting good scab control. So that project got up and running in August past, and some of you may have been at some of those meetings that we held around the country. And the next part of the project after the knowledge transfer was, so the key messages in those knowledge transfer meetings was to ensure that farmers had an accurate diagnosis, because again, through research and through talking to people, some people were treating lice because they thought they had scab, and some people were treating what they thought was lice, but it was actually scab. And the treatments can be quite different. Pour-ons for lice will do nothing to treat scab, and using dips or injectables because you think you have scab, but it's actually lice, again, may not be fully effective in getting rid of the lice problem. So it was really important to get an accurate diagnosis. Also, when you bear in mind that not all scabby sheep are really itchy and have all their wool falling out, as we mentioned at the beginning, it's important to get a diagnosis on those flocks that are just a tiny little bit itchy, just a few wee tags of wool hanging off them, or maybe that there was scab there in the past and people just aren't 100% sure, is it gone? Should I treat again just in case? And finally, the other place to get a good diagnosis is where something's happening on your boundaries or where you've bought sheep in. Instead of just treating every single sheep on the whole farm just in case, get a diagnosis and confirm, is there scab present? And if there is, go ahead and treat. And if there's not scab present, then don't treat. It saves time, it saves money, but it also reduces the pressure and resistance developing to the treatments. And there is some evidence that there is some resistance developing in sheep scab mites out there to the injectable products. So it's important that we know that we're definitely using the right product at the right time. To get an accurate diagnosis, there's now available a blood test, which your vet can take a blood sample and send off to Scotland. And it takes a week or a working week, so a calendar week or maybe 10 days to get the blood test results back. And that will confirm whether the sheep scab in the flock or not. So that's really useful. You don't have to wait for signs. You don't have to go catching all the sheep and scraping them and trying to find mites on the surface of them, which can be quite challenging. The video we had at the beginning of that sheep scab mite from South Armagh, it's great if you can find one and you see that down the microscope. But if you've got itchy sheep and you can't see anything down the microscope, you're not any better off. Because you can't see them doesn't mean they're not there. So the blood test is really useful because it'll show up sheep scab long before the sheep will start itching. 2 weeks after a sheep's been infested, they'll show positive on the blood test. Sometimes it can be 2 months after they've been infested or longer before they actually start itching. So it can be really helpful in getting ahead of the disease, catching it if it's in an area or if you accidentally brought it in through purchase, before the sheep actually gets sick, before their body condition starts dropping off, before there's as much of an economic loss to you and a welfare problem to the sheep. The importance of effective treatment has been highlighted by the research we did in Northern Ireland and through the meetings we held across the summer. Dipping is very effective as long as the bath is made up properly. So you really need to make sure you know the volume of water in your bath, know how much to add at the beginning and how much to top the bath up with as you go through the dipping process. Shortcutting by trying to put more sheep through the bath and not topping it up properly is it's just a way to ask for problems later down the line. You'll not get the persistence of the dip working, and you'll just have the flock reinfested quickly. So there's no point shortcutting. It's not going to saving yourself 5 or 10 minutes or 5 or 10 pounds now was just going to cost you having to bring the whole flock back in and go again later in the winter. So there's no point shortcutting. There's no point rushing the sheep through the bath. Let them have their minute in the bath. Make sure their heads go under twice, and make sure that the bath's topped up properly. And definitely do not be using a shower system. Shower systems are just not effective for controlling scab. Not only of that, it's actually illegal to put the golden fleece, which is the only dip product we have on the market at the minute. It's illegal to use that in a shower system. It says on the back of the can in big letters, well, quite small letters to be honest. It says on the back of the can in very small print that it should not be used in a shower system. So if anyone doubts what I'm saying about the fact that you can't use it and it's illegal, just check the back of the can. And you'll see what I'm telling you. It's not that I'm specifically something against showers. If they could be made to work and it was legal to use them, they would have benefits for treating small groups in particular, but they don't work. Sometimes the sheep might appear to get better, but often 3 months down the line they're itching again, and it's illegal. So we just can't go out promoting it. And the very important thing is about keeping sheep scab out of the flock. About 80% of the sheep scab outbreaks that I investigated through that survey, the farmers were conscious that they had brought the sheep scab into the flock through sheep that they had purchased. So keeping it out and having a clear plan to keep sheep scab out is very important. This is a campaign that's been running on the mainland and has also been flagged in the press here in Northern Ireland to take the plunge and not a shower. Just to remind operators in particular, but farmers as well, that the only effective way of dealing with sheep scab is to put them in the dip bath, and that's also the only legal or licensed way to do it. So the program after the knowledge, those events we had through August, what we're on to now is a scheme where farmers can phone in if they think they have a problem, or even if they're concerned that there's a problem. So it may be that your neighbor has had a problem. It may be that you bought some sheep in through a market and you know that other sheep in the market or from the same vendor have tested positive for scab elsewhere. Or it may be that you're actually seeing clinical signs that the sheep are starting to get itchy, they're starting to rub, they're starting to nibble, they're starting to scratch. So you could phone up the scheme and they'll ask a few quick questions to check that you've got sheep and that there's some signs there that suggest that they've got sheep scab. And if that's the case, then they will pay for your vet to go out onto your farm. The vet will do skin scrapes or blood tests, whatever is necessary to diagnose the scab. That will be paid for by the program. They'll talk to you about the best treatment plan for your flock. We normally look at dipping as the first option. As the autumn progresses into winter, and if the weather turns very wet and it looks like it's set to stay wet for days and days and weeks, there may be times when we have to use the injectable products. Again, there is a risk with the injectable products. We know there's resistance out there. So if we use the injectable products and they don't work, then we'll have to come back and use the dip the second time around. And we will help with treatment costs. Basically, we'll pay for the drugs. So if it's dip that you need, we'll buy the dip for you. If it's injectables you need, we'll buy that for you. And then any ancillary costs, if you have to hire a dipper, or for needles and syringes injection, or extra help that you need to hold the sheep to inject them, that'll be down to yourself. But if you're getting the treatment paid for, that's the bulk of the cost for a lot of people. So that's a big saving, as well as the fact that you get the veterinary advice and the veterinary diagnosis, so you know exactly what is going on. So why should farmers participate? We've talked already about how the scab problem is just not going to go away of its own accord. It's not something you can just ignore. It's costing you money every day that it's allowed to go untreated. It's affecting the productivity of your flock, and it's also affecting your good name with your neighbours. If they see that you've got scabby sheep and it's potentially affecting their flock as well, it's not helping neighbour relations. So should participate, because you're going to get the free diagnosis. You're going to be sure it's sheep scab. If the vet diagnoses lice, then you can go down the route of getting some poron and getting the lice dealt with. The treatment's going to be heavily subsidized. So if you don't participate in the scheme, you're going to have to pay for your dip. You're going to have to pay for your injection. The vet, when they're out to visit, is going to be able to offer you additional advice. We're paying for them to be out on the farm for at least an hour, and it shouldn't take that long to examine some sheep and to take some blood samples or skin scrapes. So you've got time there to chat to your vet about your flock health in general and get some advice from them on other issues that may concern you. And say that veterinary visit advice is all paid for by the scheme. You'll get minimal DAERA intervention. This disease is still notifiable. We can't do anything about that, but there shouldn't be routine visits from DAERA staff to farms that are participating in the scheme. Farms that are not participating in the scheme and that are reported directly to DAERA because somebody suspects there's scab in the flock, they may still get the normal DAERA inspector coming out and having a look around. But DAERA have agreed with us that unless there's other reasons, then that if a farmer enrolls with our scheme and involves in our scheme, although they will be served notifications of restriction, that there won't be routine visits from DAERA staff. They'll let us and the vets deal with the problem. So it's a way of getting the disease dealt with and reduced DAERA involvement. Whereas if you sit on it, there's always a chance that somebody else is going to report you, and then you will have the inspectors come to visit. So I should mention that the restrictions that sheep scab diagnosis brings about. The restrictions are nothing more than what a normal good farmer is going to do if they think there's sheep scab in their flock. The restrictions tell you not to sell any of your sheep live until you've had them treated. That's it. So you have to just get them treated, and then once you notify that your vet notifies the department that the sheep have been treated, the restrictions are lifted and you're free to go about your normal business. It's not like TB where you have to have a couple of clear tests. There's no cleaning and disinfecting requirements or anything like that. It's simply keep the sheep on the farm until you can get them treated, and then get the vet to tell the department they've been treated and the restrictions are lifted. If you've got lambs or ewes that are ready to cull, you can still sell them. You can only sell them direct to the slaughterhouse. They can't go through the market through the live ring, but you can get a special license from the vet office to get lambs away to slaughter. So you find you've got a sheep scab problem, it makes sense to go through the flock, see what's ready to kill, get them killed, because remember, any treatment that you give is going to have a long withdrawal period. So if you've got stock that can go, get them away on the special license, then treat everything that's left. The restrictions will be lifted a few days later, and then once the withdrawal periods are up, then you'll be able to move on and sell stock live as well. So it's not particularly onerous restrictions, and it's nothing more than good farmers already do. They stop selling, they get them treated, and then they're up and running again. We're also running a survey. Some people may have seen this come through the post to them. We randomly selected 500 farms and sent some out. Anyone who participates in the scheme will be asking them to fill in the survey, and any farmers in general who want to have an interest in sheep scab, an interest in helping us out, they're welcome to participate in the survey, which can be found online, or you can phone AFBI or the sheep scab helpline, and they'll be able to send you out a paper copy if you prefer a paper copy. And this is going to give us more of that information that we need so that we can try and get rid of sheep scab in Northern Ireland while we still can. As I mentioned, there is resistance to the injectable products. We've seen sheep scab mites in Northern Ireland that have been treated once and twice with injectable products, and they're still alive. The dip's still fully effective. We've seen no evidence of resistance to dip, but we're down to just the dip being the only one that at the minute is fully effective. If anything happens to that, if we develop resistance or if there's any supply problems, we'll really be getting into quite a sticky position for dealing with sheep scab. So we really need as much help as we can get at the minute to get as much information as possible about sheep scab, where it is and the problems people are having, so that we can try and formulate a national plan to get rid of sheep scab once and for all while we still can. So your participation is greatly appreciated.